welcome. You're listening to Angelneers, the podcast. Angelneers is a Silicon Valley community for startup builders where founders and operators share their firsthand knowledge on how to build and scale startups. I'm your host, Oleg Kujakov, and our guest today is Maxime Lamothe-Brassard, co-founder and CEO of LimaCharlie, that enables organizations to detect and respond to threats, automate processes, reduce the number of vendors they use, and future-proof their security and operations. I'm excited to bring Maxime on to talk about bringing an engineering approach to cybersecurity through the security infrastructure as a service model. More on that later and its implications. But before we get into that, Maxime, welcome to the show.
Hi, super happy to be here.
Yep, excited to have you. And I like to start these interviews off with a little intro. So let's start here. Where are you joining us from?
I'm currently in Vancouver in Canada.
Oh, fun. I always wanted to end up there. What did you study in school, and how do you like spending your free time?
So I went to the University of Victoria in British Columbia here in Canada, and I studied computer science business option. So that was sort of like computer science with a sort of minor in business. So, things like accounting and all that stuff.
And then, free time. What do you do outside of like cybersecurity?
I've done a lot of things over the years. I tend to pick up a thing and really love it and then just do that for a while. I would say the latest, my latest hobby has been freediving. So like apnea, right? So just like scuba diving without a tank, essentially.
Yeah. I've had friends that have tried that. Crazy stuff. That's really cool. All right. Well, preparing for this interview, one thing I noticed was, just kind of a wealth of industry experience that you have. You've worked at a unicorn, CrowdStrike. You worked at Google and one of the cybersecurity divisions at Google, even that I think was started when you were there. And now you're starting your own company. So you've kind of done it all. But how did you get started in cybersecurity? And take us through your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been pretty interested in cybersecurity, but it wasn't at the time when I was in university. So I graduated in 2007. It wasn't there wasn't like programs going into that. So I did a couple of what they called co-op semesters. So it's like an internship at CSE, which is the Communication Security Establishment in Canada, which is essentially the NSA in Canada. And so I did a couple of terms there and got, a job right out of university to go there. So it was a fascinating way to get into security, kind of into the deep end. But I had to learn everything I know about security sort of very practically. Because I kind of joke sometimes the first co-op semester I did was doing Java web app development to build a parking management website for that organization. So it had nothing to do with security. But thankfully, I kind of showed a lot of interest in the groups that were doing more interesting security related things in the organization. And by reading a whole lot and really getting in touch with the people in those groups, eventually got a shot at doing an internship. And it was really kind of love at first sight in a way for me, because there was so much to learn and so little framework around it. That it meant that the only way to learn was sort of through, brute force passion and hours, going through everything and learning about different platform and, how software works under the hood and operating systems and all of that stuff. So that's kind of how it started. And then, I've tried to keep the passion going ever since, I guess.
Can you talk more about some of those experiences, like working at CrowdStrike versus Google, and maybe what kind of cybersecurity you were working on at the time?
Yeah. Starting in the government, because I was there for many years, I would say that, what was really the best part of it were sort of twofold. One was the mission. Quite frankly, you don't join an organization like that if you don't end up really, believing in the mission and kind of believing what you're doing is kind of for the greater good. So that was one of the things that was very, very nice. The other aspect to it was that we were kind of doing security in a bubble, meaning we weren't really part of the private sector. There was never, this idea of, which product are we going to buy out of the box to like make everything work magically. So that meant that we had to figure out things internally. And so you ended up with a ton of people in the government that were extremely knowledgeable, really high performance people. And so that was really, really cool. Great place to learn. CrowdStrike was also really interesting. I think it was sort of I joined around employee 100. It was kind of the heyday of, this might be a bit in the weeds in terms of security, but it was the heyday of the APT fever. So APT is advanced persistent threat. And so it was right around the time when security was kind of going from a underground niche that, people knew what an antivirus was, but that was pretty much it. And then that's when, Google got hit by China. There was, things like Stuxnet coming out, some really high profile stuff. And so everybody was kind of looking for, those really, really, really advanced, hackers from other nations. And so it was a really interesting time to be there. It was also kind of the polar opposite of where I was coming from, going from the government, where the concept of what's going to bring revenue was never anywhere near, to private sector organization that was very much first and foremost there to build a business and grow. So I think it was a really interesting way to do that transition. It was a bit rocky for me, honestly. And then Google, Google again is totally different. Google was fascinating. Obviously, a ton of really, really good people. Google was amazing at doing things like security hygiene internally, meaning not necessarily just kind of the cool penetration testing or finding hackers, but I mean yes, but also just this very engineering approach at saying, how can we eliminate a lot of the risks internally, things that bring risk, things that make us vulnerable as an organization. So they were amazing for that. But it was also, huge organization. So in some ways, it was like coming back a little bit to the government, right? It's a big bureaucracy. The mission was a lot more of a thing. Where it's a pretty gray topic, right? Google in terms of like privacy and all that, but certainly the people that were in Google, truly did believe in making the internet safer. So I think that was really cool.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. And I forgot the name earlier, but you were working on Chronicle, which is one of the first SCIMs. Can you talk about SCIMs and why that was kind of a change for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say that Chronicle was one of the first few SIM, SIEM, right? I always mix it up myself. I think the category existed prior to them. To take a step back, right, about like what is it and why was it interesting, is that essentially Google has this Google X thing, which is sort of a separate organization, but really, really, really closely related, where they do moonshots. So the idea is, as corny as it sounds, to take take some people that are experts in a field and get them together to see if they can do something that is, a home run or something that is really extraordinary in the field, that may not be possible to do elsewhere. And if things go well, the idea is that then that group spins off into their own company. And that is what happened with Chronicle. So Chronicle is kind of the external company that was created for, I don't know, I think a good 6 months before it got bought back by Google Cloud Platform. But it was spun out of Google X. And so the big, I think the big difference, or the big kind of theme that Chronicle had at the time, was that we wanted to leverage the things that made Google very, very different, or the advantages that Google had. And the two big ones, I would say, one was intelligence. So Google had a lot of access to very interesting data sources, right? They have a whole internet on top of the internet kind of thing. And the other one is that their infrastructure is unparalleled and at a scale that is really, really impressive. So putting those two things together, the theme was essentially, hey, let's allow people to push all of their logs into Chronicle, and we will store them. And instead of charging people based on the volume of the logs, which traditionally all other data lakes or SIM providers would do, they said, well, we can afford to ignore that aspect, not care about the volume, and instead go and charge per analyst. So it was a different way of seeing kind of the, how to quantify the value that they were bringing to the table. So combining, that bulk of information and the intelligence, the idea was to bring those together and then provide some value in terms of investigation and detection.
Let's talk about enterprise security operations centers. I look at these from the outside in. I've never been a part of one. I imagine it's different for you, but I want to hear more about like what it's like working in one of these SOCs or security operations centers today. Basically since the internet went commercial, attackers have gotten more and more dangerous. They're evolving their strategies every day, and security teams have more point solutions and use more tools than they ever have before. That might sound like a good thing, but a study from Forrester Research claims that more tools and solutions can actually make detection and defending against attacks more difficult. Can you talk about that as a problem and where we're at today with these enterprise security operations centers? Sure.
It's a big topic that will vary pretty wildly depending on where you are. So I think there's a good idea to kind of scope it around really enterprise, right? A bit larger enterprise, to kind of narrow the experience. But yeah, certainly I've seen some reports that said something like 100 and something different tools in large enterprise are used for security. And the challenge there is that we got there because there's more and more attack surface in tech. So, if you look at kind of the evolution of technology, 20 years ago, everything was a flat network of Windows boxes. And so the number of things that you could analyze and capture and try to block was fairly consistent across, pretty much any organization out there on the planet. And over time, we've been adding in more and more layers and types of devices and types of use cases and architectures for a lot of IT. And what that's meant is that, more and more people could come up with technical solutions and products, essentially, that would give some visibility and being able to block or detect or do things like that in the modern environment. And I think most of those tools are good. So it's not a question of sort of the quality of the tools or anything like that. But like you said, ultimately, I think where the industry is starting to realize is that the tools are useful, but they are not and will not be a replacement for security professionals. Sometimes I kind of put it as a little bit of a thought experiment of, just imagining in 5 or 10 years, where's the security industry going to be? One path is, hey, there's 3 companies on Earth that do this software package that secures all infrastructure. You don't need anybody with really advanced knowledge. Anybody out of college just deploys it on your enterprise, and now you're secure and you're kept secure by that vendor. And that applies to anybody out there. The other path is, well, it turns out that difficult things are difficult. And, this is engineering, and the surface of technology is growing, which means that enterprise is diverging in many ways, right? If you're General Motors, what your enterprise network will look like is going to be completely different than if you're an insurance company. And this idea that a single vendor or a collection of independent single vendors like that can come in and somehow be the full picture of security just isn't realistic, in my opinion. I really wish it was, because that would make the planet a much safer place. But I think what it drives to is that the industry needs to mature, which is what it's doing now, and so it's kind of ramping up its understanding of itself. So the Security Operations Center today is realizing that it's not just about buying the right category as defined by Gartner, but rather about how will you put them together and how you're able to make those work for you, right? If you're General Motors, it's my go-to example, but if you're GM and you're trying to build that for you internally, you will have to go and consider what your network is like, what your attack surface is like, where your vulnerabilities are, and then bridge the gap between all of the tools that you have and what you're actually trying to do. And, nobody's going to do that with a magic bullet. It's going to be done by intelligent people learning more and more about how to think about security and just building it like all great things that we've always done through time.
You mentioned the attack surface increasing. So in the last decade, or maybe just 5 years, the emergence of cloud computing has been a big deal, for all sorts of technology companies. Can you talk about how that affects the attack surface, and then maybe project to technology that's coming in or on the horizon, like 5G or more IoT and edge compute devices? What is this? How does this factor into the equation?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. It's honestly, it's a big part of the future of security. Whenever I talk about the topic, I kind of think back. I forget the source, so I apologize for whoever is kind of the first person to kind of put that statement forward. But I remember back in university, I think a professor talking about how there's this concept that existed, which was that as the complexity of a system or a software grows, it becomes, it resembles more and more an operating system. So, you can think of Salesforce, right? Salesforce started as this CRM system, let's say. And over time, as more and more complexity gets into it, the more and more now you look like an operating system in terms of, access control and how you manage users and how you manage various automations. So I think that concept very much applies to the cloud, meaning we've started with, a pretty basic AWS back in the day, where, hey, you want a virtual machine, couple of clicks, you're good to go. But as we're adding more and more pieces to the cloud today, people rely on it more and more. What it's approaching is an operating system. And what that means is that, in a way, we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're kind of going full circle, right? Where a lot of the early cybersecurity was around endpoint security on your Windows box, for example, where, the name of the game was about watching where the attacker would go and embed itself in the operating system. And I think we're kind of seeing that same cycle in the cloud. So, more and more attackers are extremely savvy about understanding the corners of how the cloud providers are working. And there's so much surface in there that I think we're just going to end up, reviving in a way this industry as part of the cloud.
Definitely makes things challenging. And it feels like the big challenge of this industry is that technology just keeps growing. So coming up with security solutions for this high growth industry, it's really difficult. Speaking of, the security industry today in 2022 looks very similar to information technology back in 2002. Solutions are black box tools. There's heavyweight contracts and not a lot of transparency. Today, more and more security professionals aren't satisfied with, the current state of affairs. So LimaCharlie kind of introduced this API first and infrastructure as a code approach. Can you talk about first what that means, and second, why is it a solution that's better than, what's out there today?
Yeah, for sure. It's the two ways that we usually describe what you're mentioning, or how we're changing so much. One is the how, and one is the what. So to start with the how, as you alluded to it, right? This concept of very heavy contracts. So today, a side effect of having so many different vendors and so many different products, each believing, that they are best in breed and kind of the only game, around the block. The side effect of that is that it's really difficult to get access to most products, right? You very often have to go, through 3-4 different calls with salespeople, and then you might get access to a demo. And then after a couple more calls, they're going to validate that, you're above their minimum because they have pretty high minimums. And then they're going to decide, okay, you can do a trial. And so it's a very heavy process. So what the how that we're changing is we're taking a reset, very much like AWS did, like you were mentioning, in 2002, or I would say like many years ago. I forget the exact time frame, but this reset is around saying, okay, this worked great when there was a couple types of products, and you only had to buy those couple types of products, and everybody had, some magic secret sauce. But as the industry is maturing, that's not the truth anymore. It turns out that a lot of the things that you need for a security program just are not, secret sauce, like possessed by, one or two companies out there, but rather they're really well understood concepts. So we are taking the playbook of AWS and just saying, you can access whatever you'd like. The documentation for everything is open. The API for everything is open. We don't believe in hiding any of that. We would much prefer, finding the people that love what we do naturally than kind of artificially, putting barriers. So we don't do minimums. We do everything in a self-serve fashion, so that you can go at your own pace and, try the thing over a weekend at home and build something cool. And then maybe a month later, you decide to look at it at work. And so for us, that's the perfect story. So that's the how. It's different than the vast majority of the industry. The what is also really interesting, which is kind of the second part of what you mentioned. And that's the idea that, much like AWS, what we're building are primitives. And what we mean by that is, we don't really believe in, making a silver bullet. Here's a black box. There's two ways you can interact with it, and that's it. You have to take it. You have to believe the Jedi mind trick that we keep you safe without necessarily knowing how. You have to have faith. We're not big fans of that. So again, we kind of take this AWS approach where instead we're saying, look, the underlying capability is available to all of our users. So for example, when we started with our first product was the EDR, we made EDR as a primitive, meaning it was not, hey, here's an agent that magically protects you, but rather, here's an agent. Here's a large set of capabilities that it has. Here's how you can use all of those. And fundamentally, you have the keys and you're completely in control over it. Now, obviously, pretty often somebody might want something, where we make this a little bit easier, right? If you're thinking in terms of AWS and EC2, maybe you just want a database. And so they have AMIs, right? Which are kind of like easy ways to build on top of EC2. And so we do the same kind of things, but they are layers on top of the fundamental truth, which is we give you full access to the solution that you need, because we don't know exactly how you're going to end up using it. We want to empower you to use things and assemble the right security posture using all of our primitives that makes sense for you. And I think that's the coolest part, to be honest, about, kind of our day to day, is hearing about customers that are doing things that we never even thought about, using it in different ways. It's really, it's really cool.
Great. So how did this all get started? What's the origin story or the insight that led to starting LimaCharlie?
Yeah. So LimaCharlie started at first as an open source EDR that I was writing while at Google. And, the drive for me to do this was essentially that I left the government, where most people were very, very good at what they did and empowered to do the things they needed. And then jumping into the private sector, I saw that there's a lot of people lower on the maturity scale, but there's also a lot of very good people. But all of the vendors were sliding down that maturity scale towards lowest common denominator. Meaning, they were making an antivirus, right? Here's the package you deploy, and it keeps you safe. Don't worry about anything else. And that really bothered me as a professional, because very often I was in situations where I knew how to detect a specific thing and how to respond to it. I just didn't have the capability to do it. So I built the open source EDR to kind of put into the world this idea and shake a little bit, some of the EDR vendors, to show that, hey, more could be done there, and that it was okay to expose more of the product. And then when I left Google, I was at a point where, I kind of realized, okay, now's the time I want to start something, start a company. And I wanted to start a company that was not, product X, but 10% better. I've always been an N+1 person in my career, meaning always looking for, the thing that people hadn't thought about really doing or hadn't actually done, and just like going past that. And so that's when I looked at the industry and came to that realization that we were just talking about, around the parallel between IT, 20 years ago and security today. And that nobody in the space was doing this kind of infrastructure thing, empowering the user. So, we realized that it wasn't the easy thing to do. It was not the easy mode or the easy play to do, but it was really by far the most interesting thing to be building. And we really believe in the vision of where it's going. So that's made the challenge very much worthwhile for us.
Who are the people behind LimaCharlie? How did you go about building your team?
Yeah, so LimaCharlie, we started very slowly in a way. So for many, for a year or two, we were bootstrapped because when we started, you can imagine, it's a pretty bold vision, and we were really afraid of getting pigeonholed. There's a lot of EDR. EDR is a well-known segment, so we were afraid of getting pushed into that specific direction. So it was myself and my two co-founders, so Chris Luft and Giovanni Pecora, who, Chris has experience around early stage startups, has been in Vancouver actually and around the startup scene quite a bit. Joe's experience in other very large security contractors and government as well. So, we were kind of very like-minded. We were in for the big game. And so for a long time, we just built what we knew had to be built. And, we had a few customers early on and kind of went like that until the right time came along to look for investors. But at the time where we were able to really show investors what we had in mind, because for us it was so critical to find investors that believed in the destination of where we were going and not for a quick return. So that's why we really started expanding in I would say about 2 years ago, and today there's about 13 of us. So we're still pretty small, but we're a pure infrastructure company, so we're able to stay small and do very big things.
That's really interesting. I'm torn between asking more about the technology stack or the right timing. So I think my gut says technology stack. Talk about what you're doing with the team of 13 people. What kind of early decisions and choices did you have to make when it comes to your technology stack, and just talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an engineer, so I think that's a fascinating question. I think it relates to the ways in which we're really, aggressively focused. And so by that, I mean, we're an infrastructure company, I mentioned. And in security, that's a little bit unusual. Most cybersecurity companies, have a threat intel team, and they have a services team and a monitoring team. They kind of try to do it all. Whereas we are, aggressively neutral tool providers like a cloud provider. And so if you take this, this as like the foundation, it brings with it a couple of different values. I think the most interesting of those values is scaling. If you look back at, let's say, the companies like Carbon Black, and I say that because, Carbon Black have really led early on the EDR space, right? They were pioneers in the EDR space. And so I have a lot of respect for Carbon Black. But they were born in an era where things were different. They were pre-cloud, right? So there's always this basic concept from an engineering level that, hey, I have a new customer, I'm going to deploy a server for that customer. And that implies a certain speed of operation, which is slow, because it means I have to physically deploy servers. And that means I have a package that runs on a server. And it means that if I want to scale up that server, I have to scale vertically, meaning, add more and more CPU cores to that machine. And there's limits to that. So when we started very much in the cloud era. And so we saw that really quickly, that this was a huge risk for us, right? If you're trying to build a cloud provider, you have to be built like a cloud provider yourself. So we said early on that we would maintain the least amount of infrastructure humanly possible, which is kind of funny for an infrastructure company in a way, right? The idea was that we knew that if we had to, deploy a virtual machine and install some packages on it, and that was part of our day-to-day running of operations of the product, that this was going to slow us down, that we would need to hire a lot of different, sysadmins and all of the kind of the traditional cost of running that infrastructure. So instead we said, you know what, we have to find a cloud provider ourselves, and we have to use as much of their service set as possible. So that means that we don't really run standalone servers. The closest that we do that to that is managed Kubernetes. We use as much container-based or cloud functions, lambdas as possible, so serverless as much as possible, because that means that it's more pieces of infrastructure we don't have to maintain ourselves. So I think if I was to say really the critical choice for us was making that decision to minimize our infrastructure. And we ended up going with Google Cloud Platform as our cloud provider. And I think that that's been extremely helpful, especially as a startup that has to do a lot without, a ton of resources. So GCP was really a good sweet spot for us to get a lot of value without having to do too much management around the cloud side of things. So yeah, and then within GCP, we use a bunch of their different services to scale up. And the outcome of that is kind of magical, because it means that when we get a new user on the platform, whether they have 50 endpoints or they have 5,000 endpoints, it really does not matter at all. Everything just scales automatically, including our costs, right? Which as a startup is a pretty good thing as well, to scale with revenue. So yeah.
Cool. A couple of advantages there and some good early decisions. All right. The next question was timing. Why is now the right time for this company?
Yeah, that's really the key for us, right? You've heard, I'm sure, the expression, what is it? To be too early is to be wrong. So for us, it's really critical that I would say that we scale with the industry. So what I mean by that is, what we put forward is a new way of looking at cybersecurity. Like, quite frankly, it is a different way. Some people completely get it on day one. They use cloud providers all the time. They just see the value. It's easy, but that's not everybody. So for us, the timing is that we see that this process of maturity process has started, right? The two kind of big indicators for me are things like, or really the biggest indicator is the MITRE ATT&CK framework in security, which is a framework that's used to start to categorize the types of threats and techniques, to reason around security posture and how you protect things. And so, that's just the canary in a coal mine in a positive way of the industry maturing. So we know it's going in the right direction, and we are getting a very good amount of traction with the people that get it today. We know it's going to be more and more, and we want to grow with, proportionally to the part of the industry that gets what we're doing. So we are very, very reactive in that manner, where we tend to be conservative, but when we see people that that have we see that traction going up, we're very quick to scale up with that, because we're trying to extend kind of the sweet spot for us as a startup in the grand life cycle of cybersecurity.
Let's keep talking about the business model. You definitely have an interesting approach with less salespeople and easier access to your tools. Can you talk about your go-to-market strategy? What's behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's changed a little bit over the years. We used to not have sales or marketing at all. So for many years, we were 100% inbound, word of mouth. We got into really interesting companies like Snapchat during that time. And that worked fairly well. So at the time, the go-to-market, I would say with a small g, was really pure, product-led growth, right? Which is kind of this concept of a little bit like Slack, right? Where you let people come to you and they drive their own adoption story. And then they, over time, end up, spending more money and kind of really materializing as customers. So that's what we did a lot early on. And that's been shifting for us as we've kind of had this realization that the PLG part of our funnel, so the top of funnel, right? So the people off the street that discover us is really, really good. And we're doubling down on the PLG aspect of what we do. So we're really reinvesting in making this, this user experience and discovery of the product in a self-serve way really, really great. And to this day, I think we have one of the best experiences, just, from zero to value to be, it's pretty spectacular. But what we discovered was that, I think we always knew, but what we really started, operating on is that security is just not a category of product that you spontaneously decide to adopt internally, and that an individual contributor just brings it in, and all of a sudden, adoption happens. It's heavy products that have to be, approved by the CTO and the CISO. So there's a procurement process. So what we've done is we've started building our sales machine, still much, very small, but for us to take the people that do come into the PLG funnel, that do see the value that we're doing, and then to go and talk to those people that that we know have seen the product, and then just bring them along to to full adoption. So help them through that process. But at that point, it's not a cold call pressure thing. At that point, we know that they love the product. We know that they want to come on board. So it's a super positive experience.
So you're kind of getting into my next question, which is who's your ideal customer and how you build awareness amongst them.
Yes, we tend to think about sort of two different dimensions. So the first one is, we think about our customer or ideal customer from a people perspective first. So not so much which industry are they in, but because in a way we're like a cloud provider, it means that, we have a lot of products that can be things for many different people. The common denominator is that those people are in the security field and they are relatively sophisticated. We're not talking, NASA type, but really just a company or an organization that has a few security people. Maybe they have somebody with a position like a security engineer or architect, that have the engineering ability. So for us, those are really the type of organizations that we have a really good fit with, because we're not a black box, thing. The other dimension is then how do we think about those various industries? And what we found is that we sort of have three different verticals in a way. One is the MSSPs, so managed security service providers. It's essentially people that perform security for other people. So we have a great fit with them in terms of scaling and infrastructure as code, and no contracts, like all that stuff is great. Then we have the enterprise space. So a lot of cloud native companies that, again, they have those security people, they have the engineering bias, they get what we're doing, right? They understand cloud. So a very good fit there again. And then the last one, which is also super exciting for us, is that we have people building products on top of LimaCharlie. So very early on, that was something we really wanted to do. We had seen how AWS became a go-to-market accelerator for tech companies, right? If you're today building something, machine learning, you're not going to go and rack and stack all of your hardware. You're probably going to go to AWS so that you can get to market very, very quickly and scale with your business. And so we always wished that there was something like that in security that kind of gave the low-level capabilities to people that have great ideas, that are really good at what they do, and to spare them having to go and build all of this, infrastructure that's been built hundreds of times already. So people that build product on top of LimaCharlie are super exciting for us.
Let's talk real quick about the business model, and then I got some big picture questions. How do you make money with a software infrastructure as a service approach?
We do it through kind of two different modes. The first thing I guess I should say is, we got into this thinking, hey, let's be really exactly like a cloud provider and have some metrics and bill in those metrics per usage. Like if you go to AWS and you get built on the number of inserts in a database that you do. And what we realized pretty quickly is most people in cybersecurity don't want that. They don't like the difficult to predict nature of that. So we ended up trying to move as much as we can our billing into things that are more predictable. So for example, our EDR. As a user, you get to specify the size of your tenant, how many endpoints you want to serve as part of your tenant, and that's what you're going to be billed against. So it's a predictable billing method. So as much as we can, we move into that mode. Now, there's some things you can't get, around, billing per usage. For example, ingesting CloudTrail logs into the platform. So that is done on a per user usage basis. That's generally how we bill. The exception to that being that we have a special billing mode for people building products where, we can turn on pure usage billing where we say, every single thing is based on a metric. And that allows you as a product builder not to be billed for the cost of an EDR and to roll that into your product, but instead to be billed for the individual, events that transit the network that you need to build your product. So that's kind of the added nuance there that nobody else is doing in the industry. So that's kind of another one of those things that's pretty interesting around pricing for us.
Big picture questions. One thing I hear listening to a lot of podcasts is there's certain industries that you want to get into these days if you're a young technology professional. Healthcare is one of them. Cybersecurity is also one of the big ones. It's a popular recommendation. What kind of person, in your experience, does well in cybersecurity? And what kind of advice do you have for people who either want to start or are very early in their careers in cybersecurity?
That's a great question, and I think it's very important because cybersecurity, I think, has some aspects that are pretty fundamentally different than a lot of other industries, even including tech. So specifically, my advice is around curiosity and the ability to work with uncertainty. There's a lot of tendencies for I think universities and colleges and boot camps to want to offer a syllabus and a very well-defined envelope of what a security professional is. And I think that's fine, but what you need to realize getting into security is that if you want to have an expanding career and really make it into an interesting career, very, very, very quickly, you will have to learn by yourself about things that are probably very badly documented, where you don't have access to somebody giving you, a syllabus or anything like that. Because fundamentally, security is about the idea of people using, the bad guys using things in the way that they were never meant to be used. And so that means that you're going to have to look in, really dark corners of the API for X and Y to understand how it's working under the hood. And there's not going to be any documentation about that. So I think it's just it's an important thing to realize before getting into it. You're not getting into something like, and I don't mean anything like negative about it, right? But like plumbing, where, I bet, there's only so much you kind of, learn about the techniques around plumbing. It's a well understood kind of problem set. And you're not going to have to reverse engineer some like super crazy stuff, right? So, yeah, so I think to me, that's the most important part. So, as you're learning, as you're looking to come on board this industry, get used to that very early on. Find the parts of it that you're really curious about. Find the projects that you're interested in, and go for those goals, even though you may not have any idea of how you're going to get there. Because that's just the name of the game, I think, in security.
I love it. That was great. Speaking of name of the game, my last question here is, how did you name the company LimaCharlie, and can you talk about the meaning?
Sure. So it's sort of a split meaning. So the first official one is that LimaCharlie is NATO phonetic alphabet for loud and clear. So on the radio, kind of a callback to indicate that you received the information or transmission from the other side very well. the unofficial aspect of it is that very early on, when I started some of the early developments and investigations into what was going to become LimaCharlie someday, at the time I was living in the south of France for a year, and I was working out of this tiny cafe every morning. And they were very patient with me because not many people worked out of cafes there. It was kind of a weird thing. And the cafe was called Cafe LC. So it was a little bit of a thank you from me.
Oh, that's funny. And proof that not every company gets started in a garage in Palo Alto. Some of them are in the south of France at a coffee shop. So before we go, Maxime, what's the best way for our listeners to reach you and learn more about LimaCharlie?
Yeah, absolutely. So LimaCharlie.io, our webpage, our website. We also have a Slack community where we're super happy to chat with people. So slack.limacharlie.io. And if you want to reach out directly to me, obviously LinkedIn or Twitter, I'm @_Maxime. So my first name, MAXIME LB.
Awesome. Great. Check out the Slack. Check out the social accounts. We're going to end the show there. If you liked it, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating there too. Thank you, Maxime, for joining the show today. We appreciate your time and all your insights.
Thank you.